You said statements either true or false. I gave you a statement, and you said it doesn't apply.
Not truth-apt.
It's not.
So only truth-apt statements would be either true or false.
So is it true that I'm talking to you? Is it true that it's a true statement? I'm talking to you. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. Is it true that babies exist?
Well, I mean, how
Babies
far you want to
exist.
go down the skeptical?
Babies exist. Babies exist. Is that true, or is it not the case that it's true?
I mean, if you want to go down if you want to be very strict about it, I would be skeptical of that.
Okay, we're done talking.
This is Apologetics Live. To answer your questions, your host from Striving for Eternity Ministries, Andrew Rappaport.
Welcome to another edition of Apologetics Live. We're here to answer your most challenging questions you have about God and the Bible. We say every week we can answer any question that you have about God and the Bible. And if you doubt that, well, just come on in. Just go to apologeticslive.com and you can join the discussion. Give me your most challenging question. Just remember one thing. I don't know is a perfectly good answer. So we are here to not only teach apologetics, but do apologetics. If those of you were watching, listening to last week's episode, we had someone just at the end be willing to come in, and with like 10 minutes left, it was like, yeah, we don't want to do a 3-4 hour discussion. So I asked Landon if he wouldn't mind coming this week so we could get a full time with him. So let me bring Landon in. Landon, welcome to Apologetics Live.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I will say, when you emailed, your email said that you were the nice atheist. So
anyone who watched the episode last week will know that there were other types in the comment section, so it seemed like a necessary distinction.
Well, we're kind of used to that sometimes in the chat with some, but so let's start off. Let folks know a little about you. You and I were just briefly talking backstage. Yeah. You came up with some ideas for topics. I, put together something really quick. I don't know how much of it we're going to get through, but, let folks know a little about you, your background, because I thought it was quite interesting, some of your background.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for having me. It's great. I always enjoy a good chat on this. I grew up sort of born and raised evangelical Christian. My parents were full-time missionaries in an international missions organization. And so I was about as immersed as you can get, all the summer camps, all the Sunday schools, all the mission trips, everything. I loved it. There's no like twist at the end of this story where like I got mad at God or church was terrible or I got mistreated. Kind of quite the opposite, which maybe makes my sort of angle a little unique. So fast forward, I graduated high school, moved away to go to school in Florida, and just started kind of evolving as a Christian, asking some questions about the faith I had inherited as a child, like pretty typical questions. How does prayer work? Do miracles really happen? Is the Bible inerrant? Does hell exist? Just kind of going down, trying to wrestle with some of these things, really as much to like strengthen it and take ownership of it as anything. I was still very involved in church. It wasn't that I was like now surrounded by non-Christians and trying to kind of like be defensive about it. It was quite the opposite. But eventually I think that now known as the process of deconstruction kind of got to the roots, really in some ways unexpectedly and in others kind of unwanted. And I think ultimately kind of felt that foundation sort of crumble out and didn't feel like I had sort of enough of the pieces still intact to say that I was a Christian. And, I sort of processed that and eventually sort of became resolved, I guess, not in a like emotional sense, but just kind of like accepted, I think, the fact that I wasn't there anymore and I wasn't a Christian, a step back from my, involvement in church, and started processing that. And, some people that I know, started I think I remember I was getting feedback. I wrote an essay about it and shared it with some people, and as a way to kind of like try to organize my thoughts. And I had a handful of people respond to that saying, generally pretty loving comments like, "Hey, we're sorry, I kind of hate to see this happen, but I hope, you circle back or whatever." And then a couple people dropped in this like kind of FYI, what are you going to do now that you don't have like a grounding for morality or something? I don't remember exactly how it was worded, but there are a few of these kind of metaphysics, epistemology little comments people made, and I frankly had not thought about it. It sounded, I had like a weird kind of reaction to like, that's a weird thing to say. Like, I'm the same person. I care about the same things. I didn't feel like I had gone through like a personal transformation. But anyone who's delved into philosophy in any amount knows that you realize it's a very, very, very deep rabbit hole. And so it seemed on the surface to be a very strange, almost maybe absurd question to me in the moment, and quickly realized that like articulating the answer is not easy. And that kind of led me down a long path of really enjoying philosophy and being more intentional about conversations. I have a very close friend of mine, still my best friend, is the pastor of that church that I was going to at the time. He and I started a podcast for a while called Meaning in the Middle, and where we would just chat about things we disagreed about theology, about philosophy, trying to sort of model that in the context of like a loving friendship and sort of how to disagree well, I guess, in a sense. So anyway, all that to say, I am happy to hold the label of atheist, but it's like we were joking before, that maybe comes with a connotation on the internet that I'm coming in hot and heavy with a lot of top spin, looking to like, insult you, or, that I think you're somehow like an instrument of evil. That could not be farther from the case. So anyway, yeah, I happy to kind of share about the pieces I feel like I've tried to kind of put back together and sort of understanding who I am and what I think reality is and how to sort of approach some of these questions. But before I give too much of a rambling biography.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to bring Chuck in to see if he got his audio fixed. Let's see. Chuck, can you hear us? Okay, I see you're talking, but I don't hear you. So it might be you are muted. Well, I can unmute you. So, there we go.
How's that?
Hey, we hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's weird because I can't hear myself through my headphones like I used to. So, but if y'all can hear me, that's all that matters.
Yeah. For anyone watching, there are gremlins in the system today. Apparently, we're all having technical issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what it is, but so all right. Let's So Chuck, nice having you back. Haven't seen you for a while.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
Landon, Chuck is his handle on X is Atheist Nightmares. So
I saw that when he signed in.
I kind of figured maybe
I hope it's nice to meet you, Chuck.
It is.
Yeah. So, and Landon, I'll let you start because I know one thing we like to do here, or at least I like to do, is have good discussions. But I like to let my guest, even if I disagree with his view, to share it. So I don't want to assume your view.
Sure.
Because that's something that I find a lot of people do, is assume someone's view and then attack a straw man. So I don't want to do that. I want to hear what it is you believe, and then we can interact some. And one of the things for folks who folks who may be new to this program and saying, well, if they're a Christian and they're saying, well, why would I allow Landon here as a professing atheist to explain his views? Well, one reason is because it's respectful. A second is it's my show. I can do a whole show responding to anything Landon says next week. So if I give him full 2 hours, I can have I can have 2 shows afterwards. Like, it's not a problem, right? I mean, and Landon, you're always welcome in because the show is open to anyone that wants can come in. So, actually, I should let Chuck. You want to introduce yourself since you're here? It's been a while since you've come in.
Yeah, my name is Chuck, and as was mentioned, I run the X account, Atheist Nightmares, and we have a lot of fun with it. It sounds kind of scary, but it's not. I think the real fun is when we get into the comments and the replies, and so that's pretty good. And I am an elder at a church here in Leak City, Texas. It's Five Solas Church. So if you're looking for a solid Reformed church in the area, check us out at fivesolas.net. And if that doesn't scare you away, come on in and check us out.
And Landon, just so you know, since you asked me an email, Chuck would be a presuppositionalist.
Okay, cool.
All right, so Chuck, I'm going to mute myself. If you don't mind muting yourself for a little bit, we'll let Landon just explain a little of his views, and then when you want to talk, just unmute. So Landon, tell us a little bit about your specific views when you say, like, maybe digging more into what it is that brought you to deconstruct, what it is that where you're at today, as far as you wanted to talk specifically about, like, the tag argument, transcendental argument for God. You wanted to talk a bit about logic and morality. So I'm going to just open it up to you to see where you want to go with the conversation. So go for it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I appreciate the space. Yeah, where to start? I kind of like I mentioned a little in that intro. The things that sort of led to the deconstruction were, pretty standard questions, I guess, in some sense. And like I said, for a long time, I wasn't having a crisis of faith. I was just, it felt isolated, thinking about miracles, that, whether or not miracles happen or how they happen was maybe challenging to the theology I grew up with, but wasn't like, doesn't mean God doesn't exist. There's a lot of like Christians that have different views on these things. So anyway, it kind of felt that way. And then, I think I came at some of those questions, like take prayer, for example, like, does God answer prayer was a question. And I know that can be like a complicated topic. If it doesn't get answered in the way you want it to, does that mean it wasn't answered? There's like lots of kind of angles at it. I think for me, I kind of, some of those got somewhat resolved where I felt like, okay, even if it requires faith, for example, for a miracle to occur or for a prayer to be answered, it shouldn't take faith to determine after the fact whether or not a miracle did in fact happen or whether or not a prayer was answered. And so some of it was kind of empirical like that. Some of it became a little more philosophical or theological. Does hell exist? Is that necessary? Does that make sense? At least this kind of like Dante's Inferno version of it. Does that make sense in, a universe made by an all good God? Is like annihilationism or a different like approach? Does that feel like it fits the picture? But, just kind of going through those things. And then eventually, like I said, I think I chipped away at enough of those where then it was like, okay, I don't really know. The Bible can still be valuable and have a lot of wisdom in it. I think there's a lot of kind of human stuff in it too, and that sort of makes your relationship with it a little more complicated. And yeah, it kind of chipped away. And then after I sort of deconverted, I, like a lot of ex-Christians, I found myself in that position of, okay, now what? Like I had this framework, I had this worldview that really answers all of the big questions. Whether I think those answers are necessarily justified now, obviously it's changed, but when you come out of that, like you lose a big toolkit, how do I understand who I am or what it means to be a self? How do we ground ethics? Like, I still have a sense of right and wrong, but how do you justify those things? And like I said, I like philosophy. I like those discussions. And so I kind of went through that journey of trying to put those pieces together. And where I'm at now is I hold a view that I call, not that it's necessarily bespoke, there could be a better phrasing for that, it could just be my ignorance, but that I call relational realism. And essentially it's a flavor of naturalism that says, makes a distinction between relational ontology and what's called substance ontology. So depending on your Christian tradition or your atheist secular tradition, a lot of people hold this, even if it's implicit, this substance ontology view of reality, which is that the universe and the material of existence is stuff, right? That entities are more or less kind of comprised in and of themselves, and that it's fundamentally chaotic and unstructured, save for some kind of normative force that organizes it. Obviously, if you're a theist, you believe that force is God, organizes the chaos of the cosmos into order. And I find that in a lot of these discussions, that ends up sort of being an unnamed sticking point where and I just say this out loud, not because I think you will do this or have done this, but discussions I've had, it's very clear that I'm being responded to as if I hold a sort of reductionary materialist physicalism view. And so as hopefully a point of clarity, my view is not to take like the theist view of God's the metaphysical ground, then there's reality and the stuff in reality, and just to like remove God and say that there's not a problem. What I'm trying to do, or trying to articulate, is to say that it's actually a different kind of reality, in the same way that you could see God as a special kind of being. Reality has inherent qualities, an inherent nature. And the way I articulate that is I say the kind of basic, actually I may have it written down. Let me say so I don't jumble it. So I say that reality is necessary, relational, consistent, uniform, and multidimensional. So it's obviously a lot sort of loaded in all those terms. The one I want to clarify, though, is the relational piece.
You put that in the, can you copy and put that in the chat so I could see each of those?
Yeah, sure.
And a question I had early on, let me just ask, is what is your church background? Like what denomination, or
yeah, I guess you'd say non-denominational. The irony of that being a denomination, non-denominational, evangelical, I guess.
Okay, so like
the official, like not official, in practice where I grew up was like pretty denominational, but it was that kind of non-denominational, Hillsong worship music and that kind of maybe like there was a slightly charismatic group in each church, and then there were some that were more like, there was some variety, but I think generally that kind of flavor. Oh yeah, let me grab these.
Yeah, because that thing he said is a mouthful, and then if you mind repeating it for the audience who's.
Do you want that in the main chat?
Actually, yeah.
Put it in the private.
Well,
All right, hold on. Let me try something else.
All right. Well, while you're doing, well, maybe we could do that after if it's.
Yeah, sorry, it's not. I'll try it here.
Yeah, try it in the private chat. Let's see, or if not, email it to me, and then I'll.
Yeah, sure.
If you can do two things at once. Not everyone.
It might be too much. This is a true story. I fell off a ladder today.
Oh, really?
trying to cover some windows. I'm gonna paint my house, or the plan was to paint my house this weekend. And I fell off a ladder, but apparently God wanted me to be on this live stream, so I'm okay. But if I say anything really stupid, we'll just say that I hit my head at some point. We can chalk it up. Okay, so reality is necessary, which is to say that it can't not exist. It exists, out of the necessity of its own nature. It's relational, which is the piece I would like to unpack a little bit. It's consistent and uniform, which is to say that its structure is universal and uniform, and multidimensional, just meaning that signaling that I'm not taking a physicalism view, that I take the sort of natural world, that reality includes abstracts, it includes consciousness. With that comes meaning and ethical truths, and so I don't I'm not allergic to those concepts. The relational piece, and that's what I'll try to touch on here, is, so I talked about substance ontology, this idea that there's substance, or things that have an independent essence. Relational ontology, in opposition to that, is the view that reality fundamentally consists of interconnected relationships, that things as objects emerge through their interactions and mutual interdependence with other things. So a useful way I like to talk about this is, if you just think about what it means to be a self. If I said, hey, Andrew, who are you? If I asked one or two questions, I could ask, who are you, or what are you? Inevitably, you're going to use some kind of reference to relationships. You might talk about where you're from. You might talk about your family. You might talk about your worldview. You might talk about your genetics or your language, or any number of things. And all of these are sort of intersect. They're relationships that intersect, and the self at the sort of nexus of that big kind of Venn diagram is you. And you can't make sense of yourself outside of reference to those things. You're constituted by the relationships that make you up. So I think objects, other entities, are very similar, that there's a lot of things that exist in the world, but that are they're not, I think, there's so many things I want to say, so I'm going to try not to get too ahead. This ties into ethics really easily, which is a lot of the discussion in morality is often about, is moral truth subjective or objective? And in the background, this is my personal opinion, I think there's often this hidden assumption, sometimes on both sides, of hyper individualism, that things are framed as this, well, who's to say that what so and so wants to do isn't moral if they decide to be a serial killer or whatever. I sort of discard that premise on the jump and say that well-being, any potential goals or aims of moral action, of value in general, are always interdependent. And so moral reasoning, in a similar sense, is distributed. It's relational. We're trying to articulate principles that guide relational interaction. And so at a very basic level, the reason I should not act immorally is because immoral action diminishes myself. It diminishes me as an entity because I'm violating or compromising one or more of the relationships that sort of constitute my being. And so I sort of push back on, I would sort of take a strong stance to say that there's not ultimately a difference between well-being for me and well-being for you, that well-being itself, because we are relational beings and we exist relationally, is necessarily also a relational state. And so I know there's a lot there and a lot of threads we can pull on. So I don't want to go too long into that, but I think that like relational piece is really important, that in my view, reality is necessary, it's structured and ordered, and it's also, existence is inherently relational. That's probably a lot of things we may agree on. I think the obvious sticking point will be whether or not that nature needs to be personal or, involve how you would define a mind. But that's kind of my view. And I think it spills into ethics. It spills into these other questions. So I see reality, I see nature in a very rich, as like a web of existence, of interdependence, of connection, not in a like new age woo-woo way, but in an actual, like, I mean that literally, that I think that's the nature of existence. And because of that, I think there's some clarity to be found in questions about morality and questions about existence. Anyway, that's a lot. So I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, let me ask. So you're saying, it sounds like you're saying that reality would be universal. Would that be fair?
I don't know exactly what you mean by that. I would say by definition, yes.
In other words, every human being is going to experience it, right? We all experience reality.
Yeah, reality is everything that is real. Yeah.
Would you also say it's absolute, or is reality subjective?
No, I would say it's, well, so say a little more about what you mean by absolute.
Well, whether it's objective, subjective, right? If it's absolute, it applies to everyone everywhere, right? If it's subjective, I can like vanilla and you can like chocolate, you'd be wrong, but you could, right? No, but even in that joke there, right? It's if it's a absolute, then vanilla must be better, but that's preference, right? You could prefer chocolate over vanilla. So to me, vanilla, that's subjective, right? To me, vanilla is better than chocolate.
Sure.
To you, maybe chocolate would be better than vanilla.
So I would say reality is
better than both. Then we're fine.
Yeah, I think reality exists objectively. Yes. I think truth and, well, maybe I'm a moral realist, so I tend to, I think, morality is something we can be right or wrong about. It's not vanilla versus chocolate. Distinction, and this will come up probably in a lot of these, is I tend to take a third way in the is it subjective or objective question, which is to say, in this relational frame, a lot of things like that are transjective, which sounds made up, but if we think about it, so it's real, but it's in the relationship between the agent and the environment. It's between two things. So like this can is graspable. That's true in the context of me, my abilities, and the inherent objective qualities of the can. To say Is its graspability subjective to me? Well, no, I can't grasp everything. I can't grasp Africa, but I can grasp this can. So it's not that I'm bringing all the graspability to the can. And the can, it's not an objective fact about the can that it's graspable. Everything can't grasp this can.
Mm-hmm.
But saying that it's graspable is a truth statement about the can that exists in the context of my relationship to the can. My capability as a being, I can grasp things within a certain frame, and this can be grasped. And so things are, I don't want that to be too confusing, but I think something like, so let's take ethics for an example. I think moral truth can't be one or the other. I think meaning, like value of any kind, I think is rooted inherently in consciousness. It is a matter of experience. So in that sense, it's quote unquote dependent on minds. But an important distinction I would say is that does not mean it's dependent on opinions. It's just dependent on experience, right? So like rocks, we don't have moral concern for rocks. They don't have moral responsibility towards us. It's because they're not agents, and it's because they do not experience. As far as we know, they do not experience anything that we should need to consider them in ethical terms. But similarly, moral truth can also not be purely objective, so it can't be objective because we need the value to be rooted in subjectivity, but it can't be purely subjective because it exists in this transjective state, because we're talking about, as relational beings, we're talking about the answers that can apply to everyone. I mean, you can take like Kant's categorical imperative. There's a lot of like different angles at this, but that's simply to say I tend to sort of reject the subjective versus objective. And I think when we recognize that it's experience, because that's needed, it can't be decreed from an external authority, right? Like God, like we'll just take God. Because it's a matter of value, it's like God couldn't just decree that torture is moral. I mean, he could, but that decree wouldn't mean anything to us in a practical sense, because it undermines the reason we care about morality, which is that we care about the quality of our experience. Now there's something to be said about, okay, but don't we want some standard outside of any particular person's opinion, right? The very classic cliche, especially on the internet, is, well, who's to say that the Nazis were wrong if Hitler thought he was, producing well-being? But it's because we live in a relational state. I inherently want what is best for me, and whether I see it or not in any given moment, moral behavior is the best path to taking care of myself. Now, it's true. That's not to say that it's just out of selfish ambition, because, like I said, on my view, there is no, significant distinction between what's meaningful and valuable for my well-being and what's meaningful and valuable for yours. So I sort of like, I don't know if that's bringing up questions. I realize I'm rambling a little bit, but
yeah. Well, let me. There's a couple people in the chat. I know I saw it. It looked like Chuck was taking notes, but Max Peck asked the question of, do you believe there's only one reality?
Yes, I think if we mean by reality everything that is real, I don't know. You could partition that arbitrarily, but then those sets of spaces in which things are real would still just be sort of one reality.
Okay. Jesse is asking, what is your standard of morality? i.e., absolute truth?
If I try to put it very simply, it would be relational integrity. It's recognizing that well-being is a distributed relational state, and that if I want my own well-being and the well-being of other people, which I do by my very nature, then I ought to act morally, because that will cultivate, sustain, and establish the integrity of the relationships that constitute my being. And if I choose to violate those things, I diminish myself.
Okay.
And sorry, go ahead.
No. Well, I was just going to, Jesse followed up and he asked that, he says, what is the standard of your moral behavior then?
By that, do you mean what determines what behavior is moral?
What's the standard? It's to me, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you're saying the standard for morality is yourself then, right? It's your relationship.
I'm apparently not being clear. Trying to make it very clear that is not my view. I do not think it's based on me, my opinion, the opinions or preferences of any particular person or group. It is also not completely independent of minds and experience, because frankly, I don't think that makes any sense. I think that's a category error to say that meaning can be grounded in something outside of experience. So what I'm saying is the moral standard is relational integrity. It's this view of relational ontology, which I know is like a little foreign and maybe sounds a little weird, but
that's why I said when I said yourself in the relationships, right? I mean, it sounds, and correct me if you think I'm getting it wrong, but it sounds like you're seeing it's about not you as the individual, but you in relation to others. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I would say the distinction I would make is that I think a properly phrased moral question is always plural. So an example would be the basic moral question is not how should I act? I think the basic moral question is how should we treat each other? And when you put something in what I think is the proper frame, which is relational frame, then the answer, there's not an unlimited number of right answers to that question that everyone can accept. So I think framing the question properly then sort of leads you to essentially universalizable answers, which is, anyway, I don't know if that made sense, but I'm happy to say more about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm kind of thinking though, but when you say phrasing the question properly, now we get back to the standard, what defines properly? Right? Well,
it just comes from the metaphysics. So if you believe that reality is inherently relational, and that you are fundamentally a relational being, which I don't mean like you're social. I mean, your existence is in reference to and constituted by these varying relationships. I think when it's framed that way and we think about like, okay, well, why are we talking about morality in the first place? Who cares? Why is that a worthwhile topic? Why do I care what your behavior is? Why do you care what mine is? Why do I care about my own behavior? Ultimately, it's because it affects other people. It affects myself. And so it is that sort of relational integrity.
I would have a different answer maybe, but you still say it's relational, because I'm going to say it goes back to God, and you're going to say it's our relationship with God probably.
Well, so a point of agreement, obviously we'll have obvious differences. You may believe that this sort of relational story I'm telling is true, but that's an expression of God's nature as a triune being, right? That he embodies relationship, and that is expressed through our nature and the existence of the nature of being. So you may hold a relational ontology. I think I'm just saying may. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But the distinction may be whether or not you think that can or is an inherent sort of quality of existence itself, or whether that needs to be sort of applied externally from God.
Okay, I want to let Chuck jump in because it looked like he was taking notes while you were you were talking, so he may have.
And I know it's hard to like start because you just have to kind of say everything, throw a bunch of stuff on the table. I'm happy to slow down and we can just take pieces or whatever you guys want to do.
Well, and this is part of apologetics for those who are listening or watching. Part of apologetics is letting the person you're speaking with express their views, not jumping on it, not trying to, because this is one of the things, and Landon, I'm just going to talk to the audience for a second. Right?
Yeah, please.
One of the things we have to be careful when we do apologetics is not to just jump on what we think someone is saying, not to jump on, oh, they mentioned this, they must believe this, and you jump on that without hearing through what they actually believe, because I am sure that every one of you listening do not like when someone does that to you. Right? You when you have a view and someone doesn't let you express your view, but they start to assume your view, it's a frustrating conversation. In fact, just personally, I have a position I now hold that anyone who tells me what I believe and I correct them and they still inform me that they know better what I believe than what I think I believe, I'm not dealing with a rational person anymore, right? So once someone tells me they know what I believe better than me, I usually go, well, there's one of us that's an expert on what I believe, and I don't think it's you, right? So we got to be careful not to do that as well, right? And that's why we take the time to hear someone out. Does that mean it takes more time? Well, duh, yeah, right. So, and especially if it's something we hear for the first time, if it's something where, in this case, I'm hearing Landon's argument. I'm not familiar with it. It's going to take me more to understand his position. And here's the trick. Not really a trick, but the thing to do with apologetics is you want to be able to understand your opponent's view well enough that you can argue it as well as they can. Okay? If you're going to try and tackle something and you can't actually argue for it, then maybe you don't know it so well. Right? Just some advice, and thanks, Jesse, saying that's good advice. So thank you. So Chuck, did you look like you were taking some notes?
Yeah, I was taking some notes, and
I gave Chuck 100 things to aim at, so we'll see what he picks.
Yeah, you are you're like a unicorn among atheists. Yeah, I've never run across anyone like you.
I will take that as a compliment, whether or not you meant it that way.
It's a compliment, or I don't know. It's probably neutral. It's just more descriptive.
Sure.
It's you're very unique, is what I mean by that. And so, just like Andrew was saying, we need to ask you questions and learn more about what your philosophy is and where you come from. And I want to do that. And I sort of want to go back to the beginning of our conversation. And so that my first question is that when you were a Christian, what was your idea of what a Christian was?
Yeah, good question. I would say someone who, I come from a tradition that's big on sort of quote unquote personal relationship with God. So I would say someone who professes to, sort of believe in the death and resurrection of Jesus and makes an effort, a conscious effort to become more Christ-like. And do that through, relationships with other people and with God, something like that. Okay.
And then, what did you do, quote unquote, to become a Christian? What did that look like?
I was born, I guess. I guess in the tradition I come from, it's a sort of profession of faith. Like at some point, yeah, I grew up in it, and so I'd never, as a child, I didn't like. There was not really a point where I disbelieved it, but then, yeah, at some point when I was a teenager or something or younger, I made some kind of confession of faith that I recognized, sort of my status as a sinner, my need for salvation, and sort of recognizing, putting my trust in, God's ability to save and redeem me.
Okay. And this was in I think you said a non-denominational church?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
like missions, church is sort of, it was like an organization. I mean, I went to church, but the real kind of theology I grew up in was.
Did you go to church overseas? I meant to ask you. It's like where did you grow up? Because you said you grew up in a missions. Were you overseas?
I grew up in Texas. The campus for this organization was in Texas, and so I lived there my whole life. I did a lot of traveling and mission trips, but yeah, I was here.
Well, compared to New Jersey, America, foreign country, so. Or
a very fair point. Yes, a small town in East Texas, in the middle of nowhere, a lovely place, but yeah, not a foreign country.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Chuck. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No worries. So, what if you could just name the first thing that comes to your mind that was like, I don't think Christianity is true. Could you just briefly describe what that was?
You're asking when I felt that, or?
Yeah, when you first came to the conclusion, like, I'm not buying it anymore. What was the big thing, or the first big thing that brought you to that decision?
I don't have a first big thing, because it did feel, in my case, pretty like cumulative. Like, I think it was a sort of long process of chipping away or sort of holding things very loosely, and I think maybe looser than I realized. I do remember when it happened, but it wasn't really anchored on one particular question or doubt, if that makes sense.
Okay. And then my next question is, as an atheist, are you a strict materialist, or do you believe that there's something that goes beyond the material natural world?
I am not a strict materialist. Now, I think people define material in different ways. If I take your question correctly, I'm not a strict materialist in that I believe the natural world includes consciousness, it includes abstracts, it is multidimensional in that sense. So I tend to not sort of fall into the like quote unquote matter and motion some kind of view.
Can I go ahead?
I'm curious. Like, I want to dig a little more. I mean, if it's not matter, it's right. It's either matter or either material or immaterial, right? Or do you see something in between?
It can be, yeah. So I'm saying it can be. I accept immaterial things.
Would you say reality is immaterial?
No. I mean, it's both. I think it's comprised of both material and immaterial things.
Okay. Sorry, Chuck.
Okay, no worries. So my next question is that so you've come to this new philosophy that you have. What sources would you say influenced you into determining this new philosophy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I genuinely wish I had a better answer to this question, besides that it's like a lot of people. I think it sort of has happened in phases. I think very early on in that sort of deconstruction mode, sort of post deconversion, I, like a lot of people, was, very interested in like quote unquote new atheists, and I like Sam Harris a lot, and I hope that doesn't like trigger people. Put me back in the stereotypical bucket. But then it branched. I think very quickly I sort of bored of that deconstructive mode. I just like it's. I mean, I'd love a good philosophical debate, or I'm here to have this discussion. But I just don't find that like taking things apart critique mode to be sustainable. And so I think I moved away from that into more of a reconstructive mode. And there's a lot of people. One that comes to mind is John Vervaeke, which I don't know if people are familiar. He's a cognitive scientist in Canada. I think I found him originally on Jordan Peterson's podcast. He is a really interesting person. He's very philosophical. He kind of grounds a lot in the science of cognition and what we understand about the mind and meaning making. But he also he's kind of one of those potluck spiritualists, not in a new age way, but he's a cognition guy. And so he recognizes, Buddhism gets these things right about attention and about the mind and the nature of the mind. And Christianity gets this piece right. He was on Jordan Peterson's podcast for a reason. He would call himself a non-theist instead of an atheist. But I just say that to say he's really good with language. So he had a lot of things that kind of unlocked some paths for me about what makes something sacred. How do we think about ways of knowing? This phrase transjective was something I think I originally heard from him. And so he shaped some of this. I have other good friends, Christians, that have shaped some of these ideas. A dear friend of mine is an Eastern Orthodox ethicist. She went to Princeton, and she does a lot of really great work, Catherine McRae, on disability and a lot of this dependency as nature, and that kind of falls into this relational ontology stuff. So sort of maybe surprisingly, some of it's from Christianity and Christians, but kind of a long list. But yeah, it's, if that's helpful at all.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense because in your philosophy, as you've stated it here tonight, I hear a lot of Eastern influences in it, right? You mentioned
the relational piece tends to I think the hyper individualism that I try to push against, and the sort of substance ontology. I think, yeah, I agree. Those are kind of stereotypically Western. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
So yeah, I definitely heard that in your presentation. So I think I'm going to hand it back over for now and listen some more. I'll come back in later. We'll probably have some more questions. So thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, I think what Chuck said, Landon, is very true. As I was listening to you, I was thinking the very same thing, which was why I kept going okay, I need to understand more, which is why I was glad you shared the document. And I'm just going to, hold on one second, I'm just going to mute. Chuck, I'm just going to mute you just for a bit. So, all right. So, yeah, and we had some comments. So I'm going to try to, I starred those so we could bring those up. So,
yeah, please.
Max is saying, this is about when I was talking about listening to you, right? He says, that's good advice. Yes. But I feel like, he says, but I feel like I would need a philosophy degree to follow some of this. I hope not. I hope we can make it easier.
I think that's just to me, maybe not explaining all these points as clearly as I could.
So Jesse asked the question of who's defining relational integrity?
I guess it's defined in the worldview. So, I mean, relational integrity, I guess, is partly analytical. It's in the definition, integrity, strength, resilience, however you want to sort of interpret that word. Integration, I think, is a big part. So
okay,
I guess it's just the way it's defined. So I would say immoral action disintegrates the self in like a literal sense, because it's that relational integrity piece.
All right, and I think Fatima might have missed some, but by the way, good morning, Fatima. She's down in the Philippines, but she said after dabbling in lots of philosophies, did he decide to try Jesus? Where's he at now? And so, Fatima, no, he actually was said in the beginning. I know you came in late, but he actually grew up in a missionary home, believing he was a Christian, and then walking away.
I really like Jesus, though, for what it's worth.
Jesse says, "Thankful this guy has the guts to come on here," and I started that one because, one of the things I do like to let folks know. I mean, Landon contacted at the end of the show last week and said, "Hey, can I come in?" Emailed, right? I was shocked because 90% of the people that say they want to come on and have a discussion never show up. So kudos to Landon for that. So let's see. Jesse says, this dude's ultimate authority is in himself, who is limited knowledge. Now, I think you're going to disagree with that. And I think I know how. So let me try.
We'll see how good I've done.
Yeah, because this says whether I'm listening to you.
Yes.
Right? That's what I'm trying to do. So I think you would disagree that it's not from yourself, but it is in the relationships you have with others. Would that be close?
Yes, relationships with others, because it's because that's deeper. That's like sort of an ontological piece. So yeah, I don't start with a common and valid critique of sort of strict materialism or some secular worldviews is like, from a theist perspective, is that it starts and ends kind of with the person, right? It starts with you as a fallible person, and sort of who are you to be an authority on absolutes and universals. My view does not start and end with me. My experience is an important piece of the transjective puzzle, the relational puzzle. And it does inform things like ethical truth, but it does not decide them. So, reality has its nature. I'm not the one trying to say that I know everything and I'm deciding on the truth of the matter.
Okay. And one last question I see in here for now, and then I'll engage with you a bit. Jesse's asking, who is defining more immoral actions?
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of the same answer as before, which is the metaphysics, I guess. Like if you hold this relational ontological view, which I think is both empirically valid. I think if we reflect on that, I think that's true about what it's like to exist as a person. And I think it tends to be how we interpret the world. Then I think this sort of relational integrity piece becomes a little clearer.
All right. So I mean, I think several of the questions we're coming down to really come down to the standards. So it sounds like you would accept that there are things that are immaterial. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. That there are things that would be universal, in other words, applying to all humans everywhere.
Yes.
And you'd agree that there's things that are absolute, in other words, it's true for everyone everywhere.
Yes.
Okay. And so if let's step into the worldview, there is no God. Where would we get these things that would be absolute and immaterial and universal, right? Because if we're chemical reactions, if there's no God that created us, then what would be the source? And I think this is where some of the, like Jesse and was trying to get to with some of the questions of what's the standard, right? what would be the source of these things that are immaterial, absolute, and universal?
The answer to some of that, depends on the specifics, is the inherent nature of reality, as I understand it in my view. Something like, where do immaterial things come from? The come from question, I'm not totally sure how to answer, but because we are conscious, there is a domain of existence that includes value and agency and all these other, the subjective piece that's necessary to get moral truth and some of these things off the ground. So I don't know if that answers that question at all, but happy to say more.
Yeah, I would need to dig more to understand, because I mean maybe I'm not understanding you, but it's to me seems like you weren't answering the question, but it could be I'm not understanding what you're trying to say. So, when we have, for example, morality, right and wrong, right? Let's take an example. The act of rape. Would you agree that the act of rape is always wrong?
Yes.
Okay. And would that be true for all people everywhere?
Yes.
Okay. So what is it that makes it wrong?
It's wrong. Well, the simplest way to answer that question is I do not want to be raped. And so I know that it violates the inherent interests of people. And if we're thinking about this in terms of relational integrity, then, I mean, it's a little golden rule-esque, I guess, in its formulation, or you could go sort of Kant's direction of, act in a way that you believe could be, universalized. Yeah.
Okay.
What I think sometimes there's a question here about moral obligation or what makes moral truths binding. And I think I do find that there can be a sticking point. I know it's like hard to get into that sort of relational ontology view. But I think we have everything we want from morality in that view. And I mean, I say that to say, obviously there's more things for me to say and explain, but is there something, maybe this is helpful, in that answer, what are you not hearing?
So
that you want me to say, or not that you want me to say, but that,
yeah,
what's the criteria that I'm not meeting?
Let me ask it this way. So if you had someone that said they wanted to be raped, they enjoy,
that's not rape.
Then based on what you're saying, I think if you have a person that says, well, they want to be raped, then that would mean that rape is not universally wrong. It's only.
No, I would say that's changing the meaning of rape, which is force yourself on someone against their will. If it's not against their will, then we're not talking about the same thing anymore. So I don't think that's a contradiction. Okay.
I see your point. So, but what if, is it wrong if they're not making the choice? In other words, they're unconscious. They don't know about it.
Yes, it's not wrong just because it's consciously disapproved of. I think it's also about the agent, the person acting. I think this maybe doesn't sound like it has teeth if you're in a sort of theistic worldview, but it does diminish you as a person. Like it is wrong because what we mean by something being morally wrong in some basic sense is to treat other people how you want to be treated, if we sort of take this sort of plural view. And yeah, I don't think it needs to be like, that's just what it means to be wrong.
Because I guess where I'm trying to go, if we have chemical reactions, right, then they can't really produce a right and wrong, right? So there's an immaterial part of us, and we both agree that there's an immaterial world. What would be the source of that?
Of which piece?
Of the immaterial, like for us, as far as we're material and immaterial, correct? As human beings, what creates the immaterial? I mean, was it a chemical reaction that creates the immaterial?
It's not. I wouldn't say. I mean, consciousness from a mechanics standpoint is mysterious, I think, regardless of your worldview. I think in my worldview, though, reality, nature is a space in which consciousness is possible, and under whatever conditions it apparently requires, which we do not know of yet, it is instantiated. So I would say something simple like, it emerges as an expression of the nature of reality, or at least some parts of it. But I don't know what creates. I don't think anything necessarily creates. I guess I would say I don't take we're chemical reactions determinist sort of view. That's not my personal worldview. I think my view from a metaphysical standpoint is generally agnostic on questions of physics. And so, yeah, I'm not trying to solve the question or I'm not running up against my worldview says we're just chemical reactions. And how does that make sense? That's just not my view.
Yeah, no, I'm recognizing that. I want to put Fatima's sort of a question here because she's trying to understand your view. And so I want to give her a chance to see if she got this right. She says, yes, for Landon, the moral arbiter is self, the rape question. In a relational ontology, social need is assumed. The social contract determines morality and therefore reality. And then she says, did I get that right?
Close. I wouldn't say. I think social contract theory gets parts of it right. I think it's like a good, John Rawls sort of famously has this thought experiment called the Veil of Ignorance, which says a fair society is one that is designed and architected by agents who don't know who they're going to be in that society. And I think it's similar kind of for moral questions. If we take this plural relational view, it's at least a helpful thought experiment tool is to say what would we deem is moral if we don't know which person we're going to be in the scenario? And I think this is another way to sort of force yourself into this distributed view of you're sort of trying to find answers that can be universal. And then I think it sort of pushes you away from being able to say, oh, well, I can just choose what's good for me and bad for you, because in this view, there's not really such a thing.
So, let me try to explain, my view a bit. Maybe that would help.
Yeah, be great.
So, when I look at this, I think that there is a material part of us that would come from reproduction of material things. But as we talk about consciousness, reality, things like this, and I think you even alluded to this, I think it requires a mind, right? I think that the
Consciousness requires a mind?
Well, I would say yes. Consciousness
Yes.
requires a mind. Yes.
And maybe also a brain.
Well,
We may disagree on that, but
no, maybe not. I think that, so I would argue that the mind is the immaterial and the brain is material. How those two interact, I'm not 100% sure, and Scripture doesn't say so. But I think that, so if you're going to say it has to have a brain, I'd probably disagree, because God's not a physical being and doesn't have a brain.
sure. I would say that in like a very loose sense. I would just say it seems like consciousness is at least in some part dependent on a brain.
Well, that's all that we would know,
right?
Physically.
That's all I would. Yeah.
So I think that when we look at something that's absolute, so it applies to everyone everywhere. So it's absolute, universal. It has to have a source that is absolute and universal. So where you're basing it in the relations, we can end up looking and see there's, being someone who's done lots of counseling, some relationships are really messed up. Right?
Yeah, I would say it's in this. If the source if I went with you for a second and said, okay, the source needs to be absolute and universal, that would be relational ontology, not human relationship. I would take it that like metaphysical layer deeper, and that piece is sort of by definition universal and absolute. And that human relationships are a human instantiation of that absolute nature, the absolute reality at the bottom.
But it would, what makes it absolute and universal has to be the source of it, correct?
What makes it apply, well, sure, but I'm saying if on my view that source is the relational nature of existence, that is absolute and universal.
And so if it is that, right, it can't be our relationships, because our relationships are not universal and absolute. Those are more subjective.
Right. It's not our relationships.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's relational ontology. It's the quality of existence that sort of like I think, the theist position, you could correct me if I'm wrong, I think would have a similar view in that obviously God is an agent in a mind, at least in some loose sense, depending on your specific theology. And you would say logic or morality or any of these sort of transcendental categories are in some sense expressions or instantiations of God's nature. I'm just saying, why can't that be the sort of inherent nature of reality instead of putting God behind it? So it's sort of answering the question in the same way. I think my attempt and my my bias to my own view is that I think it's more parsimonious to apply that to reality instead of to what I think is maybe an unjustified answer of a disembodied, sort of spaceless, timeless mind. But ultimately, we're not really talking about things that are that different. It kind of is that mind piece of it, and whether or not you think that's a backstop to reality or part of it.
It's, I guess, the question of whose mind, right? Because so to answer the issue of rape, I would not say rape is wrong because I don't want to be raped. I would say rape is wrong because God is not a rapist. In other words, the standard of morality and reality is God, his nature, right? So what makes stealing wrong? God's not a thief. What makes lying wrong? God's not a liar. And
But
yet,
surely it's not. Sorry, I don't mean to interject.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Surely it's not coincidental that those things are also things we don't want done to us. It's not like it's just arbitrary that giving people ice cream without them asking for it is not an immoral action. It seems like, yes, you can. Yeah, I mean, I understand the view that it's somehow dependent on God. But even I think if we are, in your view, made in God's image, then at least in practice, it also is in some sense like not relative to, but it is it's like in part relative to our nature.
But
Does that make sense?
I guess where I'm struggling is because you're basing it on the relationship, and yet I've seen lots of people who have extremely destructive behaviors toward relationships. I mean, they're self-destructive in their relationships.
Right. Self-destructive is how you know. I think immoral action being I'm actually glad you said that. Moral action being self-destructive, which I think I take we would agree is true, I think is evidence of relational ontology. That me acting against someone else is self-destructive. I think that's a demonstration of the fact that that's part of the judgment. Like I think, and again, I don't want to argue against someone who's not here, so tell me if this isn't your view, but I think sometimes there's this like underlying question about justice, which is like, how do people, is there an ultimate justice? Sort of who's the arbiter of moral judgment? And I think on the theist view, that sort of gets adjudicated at some point in the afterlife or the transition or whatever. I think in my view, and I don't always think this is necessarily satisfying, but like experience is the judge. I think I would go as far to say that's the judge for both of our views. You would maybe say that the experience that you're concerned about is in the afterlife, but ultimately like that judgment to immoral action is sort of its impact on experience, both ours and others.
No, I don't. And I don't think we would agree with it, because it's not that I'm looking for the judgment by the experience in the afterlife. The judgment comes from the nature of who God is.
Sure. Because,
and the reason I say is because if we're going to rely on our experience, well, first off, our experience could be deceiving. People are deceived by their experience. Almost every criminal that's in prison thinks they're innocent. So their experience is that it was always someone else's fault or it didn't happen.
sure.
Right? So, great, because if we're saying it's universal and absolute, it can't be something where my experience can alter it or change it or be the standard of it.
It's not that it's I guess I would say that the experience is the like motivation. So if we had the like why ought you be moral question like discussion, if I've tried to sort of give varying answers to that type of question. I think if I ask that of you, you can attribute to God's nature. If I just did and why that, and why ought I, and why should I live according to God's nature, and why should I live according to the design, and why, and go back and back. Is it true that at some point you would say, because there's a consequence, because it's in my interests to have a certain type of afterlife? It seems like at some point, and my view is that consciousness is the only intrinsic source of value. That at some point you have to appeal to it, even if the attribution is God's nature and his commands and his will, any of that. I think at some point, the only appeal we can make that means anything to other people is that it has an impact on your experience.
But
what do you think of that?
You're appealing to your consciousness, but where do you get the consciousness from? Right? What's the source of that?
What's the source of consciousness?
What is it?
I don't know what the source of consciousness is. I just know consciousness is part of my nature, and it's the domain in which value exists.
But where would we get that from?
It's part of reality. It's part of nature.
Yeah, and what
saying, where do I get my hands? It's just part of.
And I think where I would see this, and let me just read some scripture. This is Romans chapter 1. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but became futile in their speculations, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. And so what I would say is that which you call a conscience is your knowledge of God. It is the source of it is God. It is that God has made it evident to you that he exists. And when we violate his nature, we do something against his nature, that is what that called guilty conscience. That is how what God uses to reveal not only that he exists, but that we're going against his nature.
Sorry, just to clarify, did you ask me where the conscience comes from?
Yes.
Okay, I think I thought you meant where does my consciousness come from? Sorry, and then you said that, and it clarified I might have misunderstood you.
Well,
I guess in my view, the conscience would be. Sorry, go ahead. What
do you see as the difference before you answer?
Well, if you're saying the
consciousness,
conscience is this sort of moral instinct of some type about, I think you use the word guilt or blame or
guilty.
There's like an oughtness, an oughtness instinct, maybe we could say. I would say that's just a sense of a relational being. I think there's, we have a natural, interdependence with other people. I think we have, that's something that's not as sensitive in some as it is with others. Like anything, it needs to be cultivated. But I don't think that piece is necessarily something that, is crying out for a transcendental explanation. Sorry, I just realized I misunderstood your question before, and so I didn't want it to sound like I was like waving it away or anything.
But where does that come from? Where do we get? Where do we have the conscious from?
It's part of our nature.
Okay, but it's not part of a material nature, right?
Right. We're not purely material beings.
Yeah, and the whole idea of where we would get an immaterial nature from without God, how could that come about?
Well, in my view, nature includes immaterial things and immaterial potential. And so how a specific instantiation of consciousness like mine comes to be, like I said, I think we've both said, I'm not sure exactly how the connection between that and my physical brain works. There seems to be a dependence there. But on my view, that's not branching into a sort of unexplained category that I think, that I'm saying everything is just material and who knows about consciousness.
I don't think that you're saying everything's material. I think I think it's not really a begging the question fallacy, but sort of. And what I mean by that is, for example, Charles Darwin writes a book on the origin of species. But what he actually does is he doesn't start with the origin. He starts with the species being there, right? So he never actually answers the question being asked, because he's not saying, where did life come from? He's assuming life, because when we get to where life comes from, it has to come from God, I would argue.
Well, yeah, we would obviously just disagree.
Yeah. Well, let me ask this. I change gears. I know we have a little bit of time left, but the universe, how do you believe it came into existence?
I don't know. It's the simplest answer. I would say I don't. If I had to sort of plant a flag, I would say it's eternal.
Okay. Even though, and so, because there's three options, right? Either the universe created itself, which violates a law of logic, right? Second law of logic, you can't have something create itself because it can't exist and not exist at the same time, because that's a law of non-contradiction. If you argue it's eternal, though, that violates the second law of thermodynamics that Einstein had shown, that the matter and energy had a beginning.
I think there's some legitimate debate on had a beginning. I think, in my view, there could be a multiverse. I think something has always existed, and it has been governed by the intrinsic nature of reality. I think at bottom, everybody has to have that. You have that in God. I have that in nature. It has an inherent, it has inherent qualities that are expressed in the universe. Whether our universe is one of many that came about, that quote unquote began to exist, is possible. Like I said, I think that's somewhat of a physics question, and I'm relatively, at least on the like worldview conversation level, agnostic to.
Okay. The reason I'm kind of going there is what I think, okay, from the conversation, right? It seems like you came from a Christian home. I would not say you were a Christian. You might want to disagree.
I understand. I give you can have your own theology. That's fine.
It wouldn't be my theology. It's 1 John 2:19.
Well,
right?
Yeah, that's fine. That's not what I was talking about.
No, but they went out from us because they were not really of us. If they had been of us, they would have remained with us, but they went out so that it would be shown they were not of us. So it's not my I'm just reading that, right? So it would say
everybody thinks their theology comes from the Bible. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying all I could speak to is my own experience, and it seemed to be just as genuine as anyone else's. Whether that counts, it doesn't matter to me.
Actually, this may be a fitting part, because this is where it's not a subjective. See, I didn't interpret it. I read it, right?
Well, you interpret everything you read.
Well, so do you, right? So what does it mean that they went out from among us because they were not really of us? For had they been with us, they would have remained with us. But they went out so that it would be shown that they were not of us.
Well, you're interpreting that applies to everyone, which is an interpretation.
Okay, so what I'm asking you, what do you think it means?
I'm not saying I disagree with your interpretation. I'm just saying
you experienced something different.
I'm just saying I had to the best, all I can say is all I can speak to is my own experience, which is that I was around Christians, people that are still Christians their whole lives. I was having the same experiences as they were, as far as I know. I don't, yeah. Like I said, I don't care if your belief is that I was never a Christian. In that view, honestly, it's totally fine.
Okay.
I don't have like a competing theological view that's worth like trying to dig into the specifics of, because it's just not my view anymore. So
yeah, and there's someone who's responding. I just have to, because I think it's interesting. So Wesley Curry here says, I only read the King James Bible of Jesus. Well, Wesley, Jesus didn't have the King James Bible because English language didn't exist in Jesus's time.
busted.
I'm just saying. Also, if you believe in the King James Bible was inspired in 1611, recognize the fact that you're using one from 1768 or 86. You're not using a 1611 because it changed. And, you know, oh, he's saying, yeah, I love this. He's saying Jesus created all languages, idiot. Yes, he did, but the King James Bible was not something that he created. Now, if you're saying he did create the 1611 King James Bible, then you, I hope, will agree with the Catholics, the guy we had in 2 weeks ago, because the Apocrypha was part of the 1611 King James Bible. So I'm just saying, but, you know, and Wesley, if you'd like to come in and have a discussion on the King James, we could talk about that. That'd be fun. So here's the thing, Landon. I really look at it and see that what we see is your experience, right? I don't, from what I can only go off what you told me. It doesn't seem like there was something in your background as you were talking with me and Chuck. There wasn't something that happened that turned you away from Christianity. You said it was kind of a gradual thing of just studying philosophy, right? But would it be fair to say that you thought philosophy had a better answer for life than the Bible? Would that be, or to explain reality?
No, I don't think I hot swapped it quite like that. Where like I didn't come to like this relational realism articulation and then just like say that's what I think now. It was really the deconstruction of, I think I had good intentions genuinely to strengthen my faith and to really like have a theology that is aligned with what is really true. And I think in that pursuit, I try to commit to kind of, forcing some standards onto the answers, meaning just like trying to check my own biases and trying to be open to other possibilities. And I think that the commitment to that possibility ultimately sort of led to, I think, me just kind of finding that the theological answers weren't, in my mind, justified. But it was a long time until I had like what I think is a better answer.
And you're saying it's a better answer, but here's the thing. What it seems to me is you're doing that very thing with the philosophy. You're not questioning that philosophy, even though it can't account for, the creation of the universe, right? If the universe had a beginning, that's what science shows. If it can't create itself, that's what logic shows. The only option left is it had a creator.
Well, it had a cause.
Yeah.
And again, I don't concede that it had a beginning. I do think there is legitimate controversy around that, take Big Bang cosmology. I think in general, people, at least in my experience, don't take that to mean there was nothing and then there was a singularity, if they believe in a singularity, and then there was a expansion of the universe, whatever. It just kind of starts with the singularity and leaves the kind of metaphysical "where did that come from" question to the philosophers. And so I don't think there's a logical issue there. The reason I say I think it's a better explanation is because I do think it accounts for logic and knowledge and morality. I think it accounts for the things we need it to account for. I think it fits our experience of the world better, in that I think there's reasons to believe the relational ontology piece. There's reasons why we have meaning and value, but we don't have, in this view, a problem of evil, a problem of suffering. It's not unexpected that there's imperfection and some amount of destruction and waste and loss in the universe. And I think ultimately it's more parsimonious because it's not sort of positing that extra, what I view as an extra step, to say it comes from the innate nature of God instead of from the innate nature of reality.
Yeah, but and I know I want to give Chuck a chance. I don't know if he's got anything more, because we only have like 15 minutes or so, but you keep going back to experience, and experience is it's subjective by nature. We know, well, Scripture says our heart can deceive us, right? The heart is deceptive. People can deceive themselves. So we can't use, you're relying on the experience and the relationships, but those are not an absolute standard.
The experience is an ingredient. It's not, I'm not saying that it's the arbiter necessarily. And like I said in the beginning, saying that, value, for example, or moral truth is necessarily rooted in experience is not the same thing as saying it's dependent on opinions, or that I'm the arbiter, or that even the nature of my experience in a particular moment is the ultimate judge of everything, I think. But it is a necessary piece. And I think it can't be, I just think it's a category error to say it can be purely objective and absolute, because I don't think that's what value is, or how we can make sense of it. So anyway, that's
okay. Chuck, I wanted to, I don't know if you had, give you 5-10 minutes before we close out.
Yeah, I would like to. It's been a lot to take in, and again, thank you for coming in. And
I would love to chat again.
thoughts.
I know it takes a whole session just for me to say a bunch of stuff.
Right.
So I love, if you guys want to think on it, I'll be happy to come back and chat anytime.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I'd like to turn the corner and do something a little bit different. You may have heard this before or not, I'm not sure, but I think it's going to be very important. Would you consider yourself to be a good person?
Yes.
Okay. May I ask you some questions to see if that's true?
Sure.
Okay. The 9th commandment is you shall not lie. How many lies would you say you told in your life?
A bunch.
A lot? So what do you call someone who tells a lot of lies?
Someone who tells a lot of lies.
A liar?
Sure.
Right? Yeah.
Someone
so what
who
does that
has
make
lied.
you? Right? So that makes you a liar, right?
Well, that's not an indelible characteristic I hold forever. The fact that I have lied. I think it depends on how, sorry, I don't mean to jump in. I see where that's going. If you're defining good person as perfect person, obviously that's not what I mean by good person. I think good person has more to do with intention, and making mistakes does not, I guess and correct me if I'm doing this improperly, being imperfect, making mistakes, making bad choices, making immoral choices is not at odds with being a good person, because I think everybody makes mistakes.
How many times does someone have to kill someone to be a murderer?
I think, yeah, sure. If you kill someone,
How many times
you are
does
a murderer.
rape someone to be a rapist? I mean,
In your view, if you do those things and then you come to Jesus, can you be
you're still a murderer.
redeemed? Right, but you can change and become a different person than you used to be. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, but it doesn't erase. I think this is what Chuck's trying to get to. It doesn't erase it, right?
It doesn't erase it, but I'm saying it doesn't mean it defines you.
It doesn't.
In
It doesn't
perpetuity.
You are. He's not saying that. But the question is, once you do these things, you can't just say, well, no one can go before a judge and be like, Your Honor, I know you're charging me with murder, but I never raped anyone, so you should let me go. That's not the charge.
Right. But I might not be the type of person that murders people anymore.
Yeah, but the issue is, Landon, is that the Bible defines sin as the violation of God's moral law, right? And John in 1 John, he says that it's sin is lawlessness. The Apostle Paul said he wouldn't know what sin was but by the law. So when we sin, we are breaking God's moral law. And when you break a law, we understand that there's a fine to pay. Does that make sense?
There are consequences in my view as well.
Right. So have you ever taken anything that didn't belong to you, regardless of its size or value?
I have, yes.
Yeah. What do you call someone who does that?
A thief.
A thief, right?
That is not the same thing as saying the person I am currently now can be defined as a thief. That's the distinction I'm trying to make.
Okay. So then you're before a judge and you've been found guilty of stealing whatever, but you say, oh, I did that like a month ago. I haven't stolen since. Is that going to help your case out?
No, it is true
guilty,
that I
right?
was a thief and that there are consequences for immoral action. That is not
Right.
the same thing as saying I am a thief forever.
Right. But we are talking about biblical categories here. And God sets the standard. You say
You're asking me how I answer these questions. If you want to tell me what your biblical standard is, that's totally fine.
right.
I'm just saying, in my view, these are not contradictions.
Right. I just want you to understand that when you do these things, you're violating God's moral law, and then there's a fine to pay, and that's true for everyone. Right.
I'm violating the moral law in my view as well. Correct.
Right. Okay. So, in your opinion, noting that you've violated these commandments, and there's, more of the canons of God's law pointed at you, right? Would you be innocent or guilty of breaking those moral laws?
I would be guilty of having broken those moral laws. Yes.
Right. And then, so should God send you to heaven or to hell?
If he's good.
Absolutely, he's good. And I don't think you understand
If he's
exactly
good,
what that means.
If he is good, the point I'm making is, if you're meaning that because I stole something as a child and that's against the law, that it's somehow justified that God would send me to hell, that I will disregard out of hand, because I think that's morally completely bankrupt.
And so what ultimate authority dictates that that's morally bankrupt? Or who are you to judge God's morality?
I'm judging what you just said. I understand that.
And I'm reflecting what God's word says. It's not
It's not a proportional punishment.
Well, there's two answers to that. And I had the same exact conversation with Godless Granny, and she brought it up. And the first answer to that is that a crime against an infinite eternal authority deserves an infinite eternal punishment. Now, I know that we as Americans
do not think that follows.
Yeah, we as Americans, we think of a president, but God and Christ is a king, and it's totally different. And the second point I want to make concerning your objection is that who says that when we're in hell we stop sinning? We're probably sinning even more, and so we can't keep on sinning, and so we've got an eternal punishment.
Sure,
So there are
speculating about that is fine. I don't think that excuses injustice.
Okay, what ultimate authority dictates what justice and injustice is?
I think justice is proportional punishment. For
Okay,
something.
so you're the ultimate
Your
authority.
logic that a crime, quote unquote, against an eternal God somehow implies or infers an eternal punishment, I think is a fallacious argument. If you're meaning
so
that to be
so
logical.
you're the ultimate authority.
No, I'm just saying. I think.
What is the ultimate authority that determines right and wrong and just and unjust punishment?
On my view, we've talked about it. Relational ontology. What is necessary to reinstate relational integrity?
And what ultimate authority?
Punishment is not punishment for its own sake without redemption or the goal of reformation is never just.
By what standard?
What ultimate authority dictates that relational ontology is the standard?
It is the ultimate standard. That's what I'm saying.
Right, and so you just keep going back to reality is, right?
You go back to God is.
That God is.
Right, and
Exactly.
my basic argument is that that's an unnecessary step to take. That's the whole basic crux of our disagreement.
Well, I think the difference is what Chuck is saying is your argument's rooted in thin air versus
it's rooted in the nature of reality and the nature of the self.
But you're having
reason
that to come to that conclusion.
I can presuppose that. That's not the same thing. In the same way, I mean, everyone's metaphysics needs to have some kind of necessary starting point.
Mm-hmm.
I think mine is the most parsimonious, and I don't know what it is that it supposedly can't account for. I know there are arguments for that, but sorry, I don't mean to derail the line of questioning. I think that sort of eternal punishment argument, I understand why people believe it. I think on the surface it's
if you threaten
morally absurd.
Yeah, if you threaten my life, are the police going to do anything to you? What are they going to do?
They might. Restraining order or something?
Maybe they'll tell you to stay away from me, right? You threaten the president's life, what's going to happen?
A much stronger version of that. They get put in jail.
In jail, right? So the threat was the same. What made the difference? It's who you threatened. When you say that it's absurd, it's because you don't understand how infinitely holy and infinitely just God is.
You can't say infinitely just.
Why not?
Well, because that's not true. I think
you can't know what justice is apart from the nature of God.
That's your view. I'm saying that.
Well, that's the view.
I'm saying the logic of he's eternal, so the punishment is eternal is not. That's not a logical inference. I'm saying, like, when my son does something wrong, I don't judge his consequence. Is not because I'm an adult. He's not judged by my adultness. No, he's judged because he's a child. He gets a consequence that is appropriate to what and who he is, not what and who I am. I want what's best for him, and so there's a consequence that is aimed and intended towards some sort of character development or reformation. But to say that because I'm an adult, the punishment for someone doing something against me should be my nature. That's what I'm saying. That logical jump, I don't think follows. It's fine if you believe that, obviously,
because you're.
I'm just saying, if you're saying God is good,
it was a straw man, right? So if you're gonna stay within the realm, right? what Chuck and I are saying is God is infinitely just, and you can't know what justice is apart from the nature of God. So you can't then say, well,
Then you're just saying God is God.
yes, but we're
If
talking
you
about,
say God is good, I take that to be I take that to be your intention, that you're communicating something to me about God's nature that's probably what we would all like to have, an authority that is good. If you're just saying God is God and good is whatever he is, then that statement doesn't have content. So if we're saying,
sure sounded like you just explained some content.
what I'm saying is, if by God is good you just mean God is God, then
Well,
usually when we say something's good, we imply that it has some bearing on our interests. Is that fair?
no. If we never existed, God would still exist, and God there would still be good.
What's the difference between God being good and God being evil?
Well, see, that's the whole point of why I was asking about the standard. The standard of good and evil is the nature of God. So by definition, God cannot be evil, because what we call good comes from the nature of God. So evil is anything that's in opposition to his nature. So God can't do evil.
Well, you're just saying it wouldn't be evil. But let's say everything that we currently think is evil, we swapped it, and now on your view we can't call that evil because it's good, because that's now in this new thought experiment a reflection or an expression of God's nature. It completely undermines what the content of saying something is good is.
It seems like maybe what Chuck just hit on is what the real issue you have with Christianity may be, is that
I do not have an issue with Christianity.
well that you'd walk away like you struggle with the fact, it sounds like you struggle with the fact that God, being just, will punish people for all of eternity, and that would be justice.
Yes, I think that is nonsense. Yes.
Yeah. And that's where I think your struggle is.
That's not where my struggle is. I strongly disagree with that idea. But that's not like, I think you can be a Christian and have a different view.
Well, then you have a different definition of what a Christian is than the Bible. But Chuck, I don't.
Everybody does.
No.
I just mean there are other Christians who have different definitions of what a Christian is.
Yeah, but
everyone believes they're right.
Yeah, but
which is fine.
That's because they go off their experience and their definition of reality, and not using what God says in His Word, using language. And
I've heard them all reference the Bible.
I didn't say reference the Bible. God gave us language. There's a grammar. There's people that misinterpret. That's fine. Happens all the time. People take things out of context, but we can recognize that objectively. So Chuck's going exactly where I was going to go when I said so. So I want. I'll let Chuck finish, and then I'm gonna deal with a couple of comments that we have in the chat.
I'll just say, I think what you guys are getting at is a problem I would have on your view. I guess I just don't see why those aren't problems on my view, and I don't know why I should adopt or have like concern about that implication. Does that make sense? I don't think it's just that God would punish people for finite crimes with eternal punishments.
You know what's not
If you
just?
think it is, just because God is God and He says, that's fine. That's just, we just disagree on what those terms mean.
You want to know what is not just? Is a perfect man paying the penalty for guilty sinners. Landon, what did God do so that people don't have to go to hell?
On your view, Jesus died for a few days.
That's it?
Well, you tell me. This is your view. It's not mine.
Well, it's the biblical view, and it's the fact that Jesus Christ, God in the flesh, came down on this earth, and he lived under that law that you and I broke so many times, and he lived a perfect, sinless life of obedience, right? And he, what do we know about Jesus? He fed the hungry, he healed the sick, he raised the dead, he called out the religious hypocrites, and he did all these great and wonderful things, but later those religious hypocrites had him killed and put on a curse. And Jesus wasn't murdered per se. He said he came, that's what he came to do, right? They ripped out his beard. He was betrayed by a friend. His followers abandoned him. His beard was ripped from his face. He was whipped to where he had flesh and bone showing, and then he was nailed to a cross, where eventually he said that it was finished. Right? He accomplished the mission that he came. And the fact is, Landon, is that you and I broke God's moral law, but Jesus, God in flesh, came and paid that fine for guilty sinners. And for those who will make up their mind and heart to turn from their sin, the biblical word for that is repent, and place their faith in Jesus Christ and his finished work on the cross, then the Bible says God will forgive that person of their sins and grant them the gift of eternal life. The fact is that we broke God's moral law, but Jesus paid the fine for guilty sinners. Does that at least logically make sense?
I understand that is your view.
Okay. And so when you're talking about justice and injustice, right, we get what we deserve if we go to hell. But Jesus got what he did not deserve. And that's because of his great love for his children. That's the God whom we love and worship.
Understood.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think, Landon, I think that's the key difference where we would be is the idea of, I think you struggle, or you said you just strongly disagree with the fact that God would punish people in hell
eternally. Yes.
Right. So, I do want to thank you for coming on. Right. It was a good.
Great.
I think that I mean it would be interesting talking more. Your view is definitely different, as Chuck said, a unicorn.
And I fear it may have been a little more rambling at the beginning than I hoped. It's a lot to try to throw out there, but I'd love to talk more about it. And with you, Chuck, I would love to tag with you sometime, or presupposition. I don't know if you're a tag guy, but
I'm definitely presuppositional, somewhat tag. I have pretty much my own different version of presup. So yeah.
Cool. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah. So, and look, anyone's always allowed to come in anytime. So just go to apologeticslive.com. You scroll down to the duck icon, click on that to join us, and anyone can join. So, you're always welcome to come back. I'm just, we got a guy in the chat that is, I just love this. Why is it that the most incomprehensible people always like to use caps? I mentioned about King James, including the Apocrypha. And so Wesley's like, is how Satan fooled men into writing the lies called the Apocrypha. But that was in your King James Bible that you say God gave you, right? It is kind of funny. I'm just going to put a question out to the chat, those who are seeing what he's posting on YouTube. Can anyone see a single sentence he says that's coherent? I mean, there's a lot of caps. Here you just see he's just putting things out, all caps there. Jesus says, and I didn't even read this one, I just put one up. Jesus said 144,000 shall say something on the day you leave mankind cast in hell, and those 144,000 shall be sealed. I mean, I could have grabbed any comment he posted. I don't see a single one that makes any sense. So pray for Wesley, because I don't know that he's all there. But he knows how to use the caps lock. I'm just saying, pray for Landon, that, he would repent and receive Christ. I don't think he's going to be offended by me saying that.
I'll take all your prayers.
Yeah. I mean, he knows I prayed before we got started. I prayed for his salvation beforehand.
Right to me. Yep.
It's my greatest concern for you, Landon. All of the philosophy and all that put aside, my greatest concern is where you'd spend eternity, right?
I mean this genuinely. I do appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, denying that doesn't mean it won't happen.
Sure.
And it is 10:01 and someone just came into the backstage. Bram, I'm going to ask if it's okay if you come back in next week. Would that be all right? All right. I could hear him. The audience couldn't. He said, yeah, that'd be fine. Just because we're just finishing up. Actually, not next week. What am I saying? Next week here in America, we have this thing.
Right. Yeah, next Thursday.
We get together with family and eat lasagna, because that's what the Pilgrims ate. I am just saying.
Lasagna, okay.
Really must have been.
The Pilgrims were Italian.
Yeah.
The jerseys really coming out.
Maybe it's because my grandmother would make the Thanksgiving turkey, and I am thoroughly convinced that she started cooking it 3 days before because it was so dry.
I hate turkey.
Yeah, I think that's why I hate turkey, is because my wife makes a good turkey, so when she makes it, I actually enjoy it. But I would prefer lasagna for Thanksgiving. So yeah. But hey, Landon, I appreciate you coming in. Chuck, always good to have you come in.
Yeah, it's been great. If I could, just in closing, I genuinely love talking about this stuff, having discussions. Appreciate both of you. If anyone is watching or is interested in chatting with me, please reach out. You can find me on X, Landon Pontius, my last name, just like Pontius Pilate, unfortunately. Landon Pontius. You can find me my name's pretty unique, so it should be pretty easy to find, but genuinely mean it. I would love to chat with anybody who's interested in talking about any of this stuff. So I appreciate you guys taking the time. It's been fun.
All right. So no show next week. We'll be back the week after. Hopefully Bram will be in. Sister Tara is disagreeing with me on the, she says, no, we eat Cantonese. I will probably be eating Cantonese this Thanksgiving because I will have all of my wife's family in, and well, they're Cantonese. So I will probably be doing that, Tara. So, all right. And so until next time, remember to strive to make today an eternal day for God's glory, and we'll see you next time. Have a great night.